90s understood something studios refused to admit, that the funniest version of any story is usually the darkest one, and that audiences could handle both at the same time if someone was brave enough to trust them. These are the dark comedies that did exactly that, and the ones that made them never quite recovered from the experience of being right too early. Christina Ricci was 17 when Vincent Gallo banned her mother from the set of Buffalo 66, restricted her to one meal a day, and laughed at her anxiety when she struggled to drive the manual car, rather than offering instruction, an experience she spent decades describing as working with a crazy lunatic man. Billy Brown is a man just released from prison for a crime he took the fall for, who kidnaps a tap dancer named Layla and forces her to pose as his wife during a visit to his childhood home, and the film's harsh, high-contrast look mirrors his psychology so precisely it feels less like a stylistic choice and more like a confession. Technicolor halted processing his dailies at one point, fearing the chemistry would damage their machines, and Gallo told the lab their professional standards were killing his art, a sentence that reportedly ended several conversations permanently. The $1.5 million production teetered on technical collapse for most of its shoot, with crew members working in genuine fear that they were filming footage that would never exist, and Gallo compounded the chaos by firing department heads mid-shoot for what he described as not understanding his soul. The film grossed $2.4 million, considered a surprise win for a project this difficult, and the look that nearly destroyed it is now cited in cinematography programs as one of the most distinctive visual choices of the decade. John Cusack didn't just star in Grosse Point Blank. He reverse-engineered it from a conventional thriller script by overwriting the entire tone through his production company, until what remained was something no studio had asked for. Martin Blank is a professional hitman suffering a crisis of conscience who attends his 10-year high school reunion while simultaneously trying to complete a contract in the same town. And the film works because Cusack plays the existential exhaustion of a man who is very good at something he no longer believes in. Director George Armitage received a script running to 132 pages, and the compromise was to shoot 3 versions of every major scene, restrained, moderate, and completely unhinged, with the unhinged take making the final cut more often than not. The fight sequence in the high school hallway was choreographed by Cusack's real kickboxing mentor, Benny the Jet Urquidez, who trained Cusack for weeks before a shoot so intense they broke parts of the set. And the practical pin-in-the-neck kill shocked the crew on the day. Disney capped the budget at $15 million after growing nervous about marketing a romantic comedy with a murderer as the hero, and the film doubled its investment with $31 million at the box office, which the studio treated as a mild surprise rather than the proof of concept it actually was. Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead began as a mean-spirited satire called The Real World, written for Winona Ryder, and by the time it reached screens, it had been so thoroughly brightened by studio panic that Ryder had already passed and the original writers were describing the finished film as processed cheese. Sue Ellen Crandell is a 17-year-old who dumps her dead babysitter at a funeral home and lies her way into a senior executive role at a Los Angeles fashion house to keep her family afloat over the summer, and the comedy comes from the gap between how confidently she performs competence and how completely she is improvising. The studio demanded the overhaul after Home Alone made family-friendly chaos enormously profitable, and the title was changed from the original to something clunky and literal that tested better with the demographic they were now chasing. Christina Applegate was simultaneously filming Married with Children during production, working 18-hour days across both sets, until the studio placed a doctor on standby to administer vitamin shots to keep her functional, and the frazzled energy she brought to the office scenes was not entirely a performance. The film grossed $25 million against a $10 million budget, which the studio considered a disappointment, and it spent the following decade becoming a comfort watch for a generation of girls who took Sue Ellen's fake-it-till-you-make-it approach completely seriously as career advice. Bill Murray showed up to the set of Kingpin, having apparently not read the script, told the Farrelly brothers he would be rewriting Ernie McCracken's energy on the fly, invented the character's comb-over on the morning of his first day, and then during the climactic tournament bowled 3 consecutive strikes in front of 2,000 live extras, whose explosive reaction is completely genuine because they could not believe what they had just watched. Roy Munson is a former bowling prodigy, whose hand is destroyed by a mob after a hustle goes wrong, who spends 20 years as a bowling alcoholic before discovering an Amish bowling savant and concocting a scheme to enter a high-stakes Reno tournament, and Woody Harrelson's desperate sweating need for redemption was partly authentic because he was so bad at bowling, the crew needed a stunt bowler for every shot not involving his face. The Farrelly brothers arrived at Kingpin off the $247 million success of Dumb and Dumber, were given a $25 million budget on that goodwill and watched the film gross barely enough to cover its costs, while the studio described its mean-spirited humor as the problem. The reassessment took years of cable rotation to accumulate and arrived too late to be of any use to anyone who made it. Kevin Spacey decided without warning his co-stars that the dinner table confrontation in American Beauty required him to hurl a plate of asparagus at full force, and when it shattered, Annette Bening's horror and Thora Birch's flinch were completely real, which director Sam Mendes kept because suburban terror that authentic is impossible to manufacture twice. Lester Burnham is a middle-aged man invisible inside his own life, whose infatuation with his daughter's friend triggers a reckless pursuit of lost youth that dismantles his marriage and blinds him to the damage it causes, and the film frames his eventual peace as something he had to destroy everything to reach. Mena Suvari was 19 during filming and spent the rose petal sequences physically glued into position, while thousands of petals kept in a hot room to stay limp created heat and scent so nauseating she became lightheaded between takes, and the film's success transformed her overnight into a symbol of teenage desirability she found simultaneously overwhelming and career-limiting. The $35 million production won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and the comment section of every video that mentions it now functions as a real-time index of how the audience's feelings about the central performance have shifted, which is itself the kind of dark comedy the film never intended to make. Gus Van Sant did not want to meet Nicole Kidman when she pursued To Die For, and Kidman responded by calling him at home, telling him she was destined to play this character, accepting under $2 million, and spending the entire shoot in her weather girl persona, even when the cameras were not rolling. Suzanne Stone is a small-town woman with a pathological need to be on television, who manipulates 3 teenagers into murdering her husband when he suggests she consider starting a family instead, and the film's specific horror is that Suzanne's logic is completely coherent from the inside, her smile never once slipping while she dismantles a man's life for a local cable slot. Joaquin Phoenix took the role of the manipulated teenager as his first project after his brother River's death in 1993, and was quietly shielded from press by Van Sant throughout the shoot, and what he delivered playing a boy who lets someone rewrite his entire reality was the foundation of everything that came after. Van Sant shoots the film as a mockumentary that keeps cutting back to Suzanne explaining herself to camera, turning every interview segment into a confession the subject doesn't realize she's giving, and the grammar it invented for a fictional sociopath in 1995 is now the default language of every person who has ever pointed a phone at their own face and decided the world owed them an audience. Marisa Tomei arrived on the $5 million set of Slums of Beverly Hills as an Oscar winner, still fighting the industry's quiet assumption that her win for My Cousin Vinny had been a fluke, and she responded by requesting clothes 2 sizes too small, insisting on hair the department described as matted and unwashed, and refusing every offer of the star treatment that might have reminded anyone she was a leading lady. Viv Abramowitz is a teenager in 1976 whose father keeps the family just inside the Beverly Hills School District by moving them between cheap apartments in the lower rent pocket south of Wilshire, and the film's comedy lives in the gap between the status the zip code is supposed to confer and a life one missed rent payment from collapse. The Beverly Hills City Council denied filming permits for most key locations because they considered a movie highlighting their slums damaging, forcing director Tamara Jenkins to shoot guerrilla style with hidden cameras just to capture the street signs her story required. The film grossed $5.5 million against its budget, a return that left Jenkins so exhausted it took her 9 years to direct another feature. And the performance Tomei took a pay cut and an industry risk to give was the thing that finally convinced Hollywood she had been right about herself all along. Amy Adams made her professional debut in Drop Dead Gorgeous at a moment when she was still working at a dinner theater in Minnesota and did not know what a mark was on a film set, and the performance she gave as the dangerously enthusiastic Leslie launched her career, while the film itself was being reviewed with the headline, "Made by Morons for Morons." The film is a mockumentary about a Minnesota beauty pageant where contestants begin dying in elaborate accidents, and the competition between sweet trailer park hopeful Amber Atkins and the wealthy pious Becky Lehman becomes a pitch-black satire of American class warfare, dressed in sequins. Screenwriter Lona Williams was a former pageant contestant who drew directly from experience, and the Jesus doll dance routine and bribery details were barely exaggerations of actual corruption she had witnessed, contributing to the backlash from real pageant organizations who recognized themselves. The $15 million production grossed only $10 million at the box office, and Allison Janney later said the critical reception was so vicious she genuinely feared she would never get serious work again, a concern that resolved itself when she won an Emmy for The West Wing, while this film quietly built the following the theatrical run denied it. Adams went from dinner theater to 6 Oscar nominations without ever once mentioning the exploding tractors. William H. Macy was so certain the Coen brothers were about to ruin Fargo by casting someone else that he flew across the country on his own money, crashed their casting session uninvited, and told Joel and Ethan directly that he was worried they were going to make a mistake. Jerry Lundegaard is a spineless Minneapolis car salesman who hires 2 criminals to kidnap his own wife for ransom money, while a heavily pregnant police chief named Marge Gunderson connects the resulting bloodbath with the cheerful efficiency of someone who has seen this kind of stupidity before. Macy then told Ethan Coen that if he didn't get the role, he would shoot his dog, delivered with enough conviction that the brothers, recognizing Jerry Lundegaard had just walked into the room, hired him on the spot. The production faced a crisis during filming when one of the warmest Minnesota winters on record eliminated the snow the script required, forcing the crew progressively further into Canada, and eventually supplementing the landscape with shredded paper and ice shavings, while Frances McDormand wore a birdseed pregnancy pillow so heavy it caused genuine back strain. The $7 million film grossed over $60 million worldwide, partly on the strength of its claim to be a true story, which was a complete fabrication the Coens invented because they knew audiences would accept more absurdity if they believed it actually happened. The prop department on The Last Supper used a blue dye in the poisoned wine that had not been properly tested for ingestion. Several actors became genuinely ill during a long dinner scene shoot, and production halted for 4 hours, while a doctor assessed the cast, meaning the film about intellectuals accidentally poisoning people had accidentally poisoned its own cast. 5 liberal graduate students begin hosting dinner parties where they debate extremists and serve poisoned wine to any guest who fails to moderate their views by dessert, and the film watches their experiment curdle into something indistinguishable from the intolerance they set out to eliminate. With Cameron Diaz as the charming face of a moral collapse the characters never recognize in themselves. The film was shot on $500,000, at a moment when Diaz had just finished The Mask and was paid $10,000 for her work, and by the time it reached cinemas she was one of the biggest stars in the world, causing audiences expecting a light comedy to walk into a pitch-black satire about serial murder. Ron Perlman stayed in character between takes and debated the young liberal cast through lunch breaks using the film's own logic against them, a choice that was not entirely method acting, and resulted in him eating alone for most of the shoot, which probably would have pleased his character enormously.